The main idea around moral relativism is the view that ethical standards, morality, and positions of right or wrong are culturally based and therefore subject to a person's individual choice. According to moralrelativism.com, moral relativism states that it's true for me if I believe it. It is essentially one person's view against another to judge what the right thing to do in a situation is.
I'm persuaded that although people give lip service to relativism, in fact, nobody can live that way. It is impossible to live with other persons regarding them as pure means to an end and not thinking that there are objectively right and wrong ways that you would want to treat them and that you would want them to treat you. Very often you can find out what a person really believes as opposed to what he says by how he reacts when people treat him in a certain way. For example, I had a friend who was a philosophy professor at a university, and a student in his philosophy class turned in a paper to him in which he argued for moral relativism, that there are no moral values, no moral duties, everything is relative and so forth. And my friend put an F on the paper and sent it back to the student, even though it was a good piece of work. And the student came into his office angry and said, "How can you give me this F? This was a good piece of research. How can you do that?" And the professor looked at it and he said, it was handed in a blue folder. And I don't like blue folders. The grade is an F. And the student said, "But that's not fair. You can't do that." And the professor said, "It's not what? Isn't this the paper that argued that there is no such thing as fairness and moral rightness and wrongness?" And all of a sudden the student got the point. And at that point the professor changed the grade to an A and turned it back into the student. I think the student learned more through that experience than he did through writing the paper. See, it's how we react when others treat us in ways that we think are wrong that our real moral sensitivities come out. So I would try to talk with a person who claims that there is no objective moral values, no moral duties, just about his life, about how he lives his life, how he reacts if, say, the church were to institute the Inquisition in this country and begin to execute people, if he thinks that wouldn't be a wrong thing to do. And I find that with 98% of people who are sincere and not just wanting to argue, 98% of people can be very quickly brought to the point that they do see that there are really objective moral values and duties. And then that really faces them with a crisis because they've got to decide if these really are objective, where do they come from? What's the foundation for them? And I think this really does provide powerful reason to believe in a transcendent good that is the source of these values and duties.
In today's society, the argument for moral relativism is the idea that morality encourages the fact that there is humility in the world. It gives the idea that the world has a view that can help everyone just because it is moral to do so. The statement most people are familiar with is treat others as you would like to be treated, and this is a perfect example of how people view moral relativism. An argument against the view of moral relativism is much more detailed in the way that everyone has morals, but for those morals, is it actually a bad thing for everyone to be moral? An example is given in a documentary by Emrys Westacott of Alfred University that it exaggerates cultural diversity. Moral relativism basically states that there is a set of rules that everyone has to follow in order for the world to be perfect. Well, in this sort of system, there's always going to be exceptions to the perfect situation. An example of this is that some indigenous cultures will definitely have different rules than a rule in the United States. In some nomadic cultures, it is morally accepted to commit infanticide. Now in America and other cultures around the world, this is definitely not an acceptable thing to do as it is seen as barbaric.
So the word moral is all defined on a person and what the person either believes is right or wrong. There are rules that are definitely there for a reason as if they weren't there. The world would be total chaos. And there are rules that certain people follow that are totally accepted in their culture. That is not morally okay in other cultures. Basically, it is up to the people's choices on what is moral or not in their worldview of moral relativism.